Silence does that sometimes, doesn't it? Especially when we expect to hear something, or we expect that something's going to happen, and then it doesn't, and there is that pervading silence. Our mind starts moving. What's going on? What's happening? What is he about to say? What do I need to get ready for? And the wheels begin spinning. We have, strangely, an uncomfortability with silence sometimes. It's not always welcome, especially when we're not expecting it. Silence. Our culture doesn't help at all either. Our culture almost trains us to live in noise, to live in sound. From the moment the alarm clock goes off in the morning, perhaps then the radio is blaring at us and we're listening to things on the radio. We might flip the television on to see what the news is, open up the computer, run through our tablet, our phone, whatever. The music in the car, the radio going on. Even if it's good stuff, listening to it, where is the silence? We don't know what to do with silence anymore, I don't think. And I think that inhibits even our conversation with one another. Because silence creates the space for listening to happen. And when we're not okay with that silence, listening doesn't happen as easily. Even when we're in conversation, how many times have you been a part of a conversation with someone and they say something and you're already thinking about how you're going to respond or what you're going to say? They make a point and like, what's my next point going to be? And we're not really listening to what the other person is saying to us as much as we're thinking what we need to say next to keep the conversation going. And even if we took that pause, we're almost afraid of being quiet too long because they might start talking again, and now I'm going to be 2 things behind, and I have to keep up. And conversation becomes a competition with winners and losers. Did I get my point across? Did I make that other person understand me? Did I change a mind? And so on and so forth. And we no longer listen. Conversation is about creating and bridging the gap between us. Communication allows that to happen, but listening allows us to bring the other into ourselves. Listening requires silence. Jesus today stood up in the midst of the synagogue, and this picks up right where we left off last week, where he just gave them good news. I have come to release the prisoner. I have come to bring light to those in darkness. The Messiah is here in your midst. These words are fulfilled. And that is good news. And the people hear that and immediately rejoice. Oh, wonderful. But then the wheels start turning when Jesus goes and sits down. And there's that silence. And they start thinking, wait a minute. Isn't this Joseph's kid? We know him. Didn't he grow up from us? How can he say that? Does he think he knows more than we do? And so it goes. And they no longer are listening to Jesus. They are coming up with responses. And the Lord calls them on this. He calls them on this and says, I know what you're thinking. You're going to tell me you think you know who I am. But I tell you, no prophet's accepted in his own place. And he gives them the examples from the Old Testament. And that offends them. And they're no longer listening that, oh yeah, you know what? I am kind of judging you. I am kind of pigeonholing you. They don't hear that. Instead, they lead to more not listening. More throwing stuff back at him. So much so that they want to pitch him over the cliff. How quickly they go from, isn't this wonderful, to, you need to die. But don't we see that so often in our own communication? When you turn on the news, when you open up social media, when you look to see what gets posted and what gets put out there, that same reaction happens. The jump to violence, the jump to hatred, the jump without listening. Rather than St. Francis's prayer, Lord, I hope to understand more than to be understood. We want to be understood more than understand. I want to get my position out there, and I need to protect that. I think this invites us into the realization that we, in our own lives, need more silence, because the word is spoken and heard in the silence. When there isn't the noise, to speak that word, to stop and to listen. You know how it's often said that in the middle of July, in the heat of summer, you go out into the middle of a cornfield and you can actually hear the corn growing. Well, I used to be in a rural part of the parish before I got here, 8 years, and I did that once. Wanted to go out to the cornfield where there was no traffic, in the middle of nothing, and listen. And you can hear the corn growing. You almost have to stop breathing, because even your breath is too loud to drown out the teeny tiny little squeak of that leaf when it pushes against the stalk. And you hear it all around you when you practically hold your breath and listen. This is how God speaks to us. God speaks to us in the silence and in the quiet. And so we have to make a space for Him in our noisy and hectic and chaotic lives, lest we miss Him. I have a bad habit sometimes of multitasking with my prayer. So the prayers that as a priest I am supposed to pray daily, my liturgy of the hours, my breviary, I can have that in one hand and the toothbrush in the other, so that I'm reading my psalms, and then balance it on the Kleenex box as I'm shaving and looking over at what the next line, and praying that way. It's a great way to memorize the psalms. However, I'm not so sure I'm engaging God in that moment. And so one of my resolutions for this year is to do my business and then sit down with my scripture and be with God to listen. Because prayer is not about us talking to God as much as it is about God talking to us and us actually hearing what He has to say. And we can practice that even with one another. It's okay to have a moment of silence in our conversation. I am not a guy who does well with small talk. I don't do well in social situations where I have to come up with something to say, and so my mind is like, okay, what am I going to say next to keep this conversation going? What's going to happen? I've gotten more comfortable now as I've grown up. St. Paul talks. When I was a kid, I used to act like a kid, and I had to do all those things. But when I became a man, I acted like a man. And for me, that means just being comfortable in myself. And so in those moments, it's okay to listen to someone and to pause before responding. Because it helps. I listen to you, now I know what to say. If I'm coming up with what I'm supposed to say before I listen to you, that's why conversation is hard. And that's why bridges don't get built. And so we practice with one another that relationship with God, creating a place of silence so that the word can be heard, that God's voice can be heard. Perhaps this is why we don't have as many vocations these days to the priesthood or consecrated life. We don't listen to God. Perhaps sometimes it's why our marriages struggle, because we're not listening to each other and listening to God. Jumping to conclusions, ready to rush people off the cliff, ready to hear what we thought we heard, rather than really creating the space for it. So as you go forth from this place this week, try to take a little bubble of silence with you, that wherever you go, create that place where conversation can happen, where the presence of God can happen. Listen deeply. When you're in conversation with someone, try to hear them and then respond. I think it changes everything. So we come here today to invite the word in, listen to what He says to us, and then to take that message to a world that is filled with too much noise and needs just